I'm joined by Chris WEAFER, Chief Executive of Macro Advisory. Chris, thank you ever so much for joining us today. And first of all, how would you see IP Week and how important it is and your experiences in the past?
Well, it's clearly changed, reflecting, I guess, the changes we see in the global energy market. In previous years, it was very focused on oil and gas and traditional hydrocarbons, and this year, as you see the agenda, it's almost entirely focused on environmental issues, renewable energy, and the way the industry has to adapt in the future to reflect the need for change on the environment and public pressure for the industry also to change. So a completely different kind of set of parameters than we've been used to in the past. And I think there's a lot of people here, traditional oil people, shall we say, who are wandering around kind of slightly shell-shocked, thinking, how they're having to adapt to this new world.
And you talked in your presentation about the elephant in the room and renewables in Asia and Russia. Can you expand a little bit on that?
Well, Russia is, of course, we know, is the biggest country in the world. It's the largest Arctic footprint, and it's currently the world's fifth biggest emitter of CO2. But the situation in Russia is getting worse. This January, they were recorded the highest temperatures ever in Moscow and St. Petersburg, and even across Siberia, the average temperature was 20 degrees Celsius higher than normal. So that kind of higher temperatures and reduced snow coverage means that the permafrost in Siberia is starting to warm up and more methane. So the situation in Russia is getting worse, not just for Russia, but it's getting worse for the rest of the world, because Russia being such a large landmass, higher emissions from Russia will have a global impact and very soon. So it's something that has sparked Russia finally into having to recognize environmental issues are now serious and have to be dealt with, whereas up to maybe even a year ago, we were having this conversation some last year, I would say that in Russia, environmental issues and concern about the environment and global warming were a talking point amongst kind of select groups or specialist groups, but not really on the government's agenda. This year, that's entirely different.
Well, that's a good step forward. Will they be doing enough to meet targets such as the target in 2050 that's been set?
Well, that's always where the question is. So the good news is that Russia's now woken up to the fact that this is a real problem for itself and it has to deal with it. So the bad news always is how long is it going to take and what steps will we see? And that's always a bit of an unknown until we get into it. In terms of, what we can point to is that in January, the Russian government did sign off for the first time on an action plan. It's called a climate change passport, and that does require government agencies to come up with specific action plans, including budgeting and timelines, by the end of this year, and then further requires relevant agencies to submit their specific programs and plans and start by September next year. So that's an ambitious kind of program, and I think the fact that it is an ambitious program reflects the fact that now the government, the Kremlin, sees this as a matter of urgency. So there is hope that Russia will move faster than it has done now that it has started, but clearly this is always the issue with Russia. Quite often you get very clear statements of intent to do something, and then it can disappear off the table for years before reappearing. So maybe because this is kind of more a global as well as a public issue, and that really has changed in Russia. Why it has kind of moved so forward from being a kind of a side issue a year ago to now something that's much more important is two factors. One is people are now much more aware and are more concerned about environmental degradation in Russia than ever before. And in the last year, we've had these major fires in Siberia, which created massive pollution across the country. There has been, very destructive, life-losing floods in the Far East and Irkutsk. And in January, there was the highest ever recorded temperature in Moscow, very little snow. And as a long-term resident of Moscow, I'd never say that I miss a Russian winter, but I do. So, it's in your face and people are very aware of it, and opinion polls show that it's now really rocketed up as one of the main concerns that people have, and the Russian government cannot afford to disregard that. And secondly, it actually is good politics, because Russia, because of all the political disputes over the last few years, is now looking for ways to kind of improve its relations, particularly with the European Union. Last October, Russia finally signed up on the Paris Agreement and is now looking to participate more with European institutions and with European agencies on participating in environmental kind of actions and to improve the situation. So again, we now see some, and the third reason is economics. And in Russia, it's always good to be able to point to something that's good politics and good economics, then it has a better chance of advancing. But it's good economics in the sense that environmental disasters or degradation is costing the economy more and more money. Last year, the estimates ranged from 1 billion to 2.5 billion, depending on what assumptions you make, but it's clearly going to get a lot worse and a lot more expensive. So there's now kind of a financial reason, as well as public opinion, as well as geopolitics, and that's a good combination to keep Russia at the table.
Well, let's hope that progression continues to grow and grow, and they can meet their target in 2050. Chris, thank you ever so much for joining us this afternoon. This has been Jason Davis with KOG TV. Thank you.